Hello and welcome back to IndustryBroadcast.com for audio article number 102. Today's audio article is written by Chris Bateman, who is a game designer and writer best known for his work on the games Discworld Noir and Ghostmaster. Founder and director of the game design and narrative consultancy company International Hobo, located at ihobo.com, he is also the author of 2 science fiction novels, co-author of the 21st Century Game Design book published in 2005, which discusses the topic of game design in the context of players' needs and play styles. Chris is also the editor of Game Writing, Narrative Skills for Video Games, which he also contributed 2 chapters. Many of his articles on IndustryBroadcast.com will appear in modified form in a recently released book which he co-authored and edited, titled Beyond Game Design: 9 Steps Towards Creating Better Video Games, by Course Technology PTR. It is now available for purchase, so head over to Amazon.com and pick up your copy today. Audio article number 102, titled Strategic Play, written by Chris Bateman and read aloud by Ryan Wienko on the 23rd of April, 2009. Strategic play relates to mastering complex game systems and problem solving, with a drive towards perfectionism. It is arguably the oldest play style in video games, and its commercial importance peaked in the 1980s and 1990s. Now in decline, there nonetheless exists a great number of hobbyist players whose play needs are best met by the strategic play style. Conversion from other models. Strategic play is presumed to correlate with rational in temperament theory, which corresponds with NT, or intuitive and thinking preferences, in Myers-Briggs typology. Additionally, the Type 2 manager in DGDI-1 correlates strongly with strategic play. Note, however, that the Fierro theme of the Type 1 conqueror is often present in strategic play. Talents. Different play styles are associated with different talents, which are expressed in those players who favor this approach to play. Complex systems are the focus of most, but not all, strategic play, with examples including the majority of simulation and turn-based strategy games, as well as the CRPG games. Players who favor this playstyle show greater than usual tolerance for complexity, and indeed will generally persevere with games while they feel that they do not yet understand them, provided of course that they believe that their tenacity will eventually be rewarded. This allows them to tolerate far longer learning curves than players favoring other playstyles. But note that every player can be frustrated by any game for a variety of reasons, and the strategic playstyle only gives players the capacity to learn how to use complex game systems. It does not guarantee that they will persist with any given game. Coupled with this tolerance of complexity comes an ability to perceive ways to optimize the complex systems in question. This gift for optimization is expressed as a tendency to evaluate every situation in order to determine how to get the maximum benefit for minimum cost. So pronounced is this tendency to min-max game situations that it is even mentioned in Kiersey's description of the rational temperament, even though play is not the focus of his work. There is a relationship between complexity and min-maxing, since in simple systems there is a limited scope for this kind of optimization. The love of turn-based strategy games associated with strategic play is partly related to the capacity for these games to afford multiple optimal routes, and thus to allow for both min-maxing and choice. A third talent associated with the strategic play style is problem-solving, and the related ability to think ahead. In many respects, this is simply an extension of tolerance for complexity, since every problem represents a situation of incomplete information, which represents a more convoluted arrangement than the equivalent situation where the solution is known, but must be implemented by skill. Given the relationship between science and the rational temperament, the gift for problem-solving associated with strategic play is unsurprising, and the games that leverage this talent are often solved by what might be considered a scientific approach. That is, hypothesizing possible solutions, exploring the outcome of these solutions, and then using this data to produce new hypotheses until a solution has been found. All classic adventure games, text adventures, point and clicks, and modern descendants based on this form find their most loyal fans among players whose play needs lean towards the strategic. The driving force behind strategic play is the rational temperament's desire for knowledge and mastery, and as a result, strategic play can be seen more as focused on perfectionism than fun, although it must be understood that by making perfection the goal, the player expressing this playstyle achieves fiero and personal satisfaction by achieving mastery. The greater trials they endure en route to this goal, the more it enhances the ultimate reward of fiero, or the pride of accomplishment in the face of adversity. When this theme is expressed purely in strategic terms, the focus of the perfectionism will tend to be a desire for complete game knowledge. An examination of the FAQs available online for complex games, for example the Pokemon games, shows the output of this drive for complete understanding. When this theme is tempered by logistical skills, the focus will tend more towards complete acquisition, a drive to collect everything that can be found in the game space. Finally, when this theme is tempered by tactical skills, the focus will tend more towards the mastery of skills, the ability to finesse a situation and not just win. Kiersey does not often mention play in his temperament descriptions, so it is noteworthy that he includes the following comment in respect to strategic skills. People who are strong in strategic skills play not so much to have fun, but to exercise their ingenuity in acquiring game skills. Fun for them means figuring out how to get better at some skill, not merely exercising the skills they already have, and so for such people the field of play is invariably a laboratory for increasing their proficiency. When they play sports or even cards and board games, there must be continuous improvement with no backsliding. When playing with other people, those preferring the strategic play style often seem to be highly competitive, as is mentioned in passing in Barron's account of the rational temperament. But for those players expressing this style who are introverted by nature, this competitiveness is the product of the personal drive towards a high degree of proficiency. The other players are simply part of the complex system that they are trying to master. Such players often prefer to play alone. Friction. Players favoring specific play styles are also prone to different frustrations. Different elements of play cause varying degrees in friction for players, according to the preferred way to play. The principal source of friction associated with strategic play is limitation, specifically limitation of choice and the consequent disempowerment this can lead to. The rational temperament which drives this style of play is associated with a need for autonomy, and players who prefer the strategic play style often have a strong need to feel completely in control of their play, to have the freedom to make choices about how that play will proceed. When insufficient choices are provided, this creates a state of powerless limitation. For example, a typical first-person shooter game consists primarily of a linear sequence of fights. This structure is generally sufficient for players expressing other play needs, but for the strategic play, it is unacceptably limited. The player faces no meaningful strategic choice in this situation, and as such, this limitation becomes a source of frustration if the game does not engage the player by other means. Deus Ex is a good example of a game that sets out to minimize the source of friction for players favoring strategic play, by adding choice at every level of design. The player is afforded virtually unlimited choices for proceeding through the game space, but in the process of providing these choices, the game develops such a degree of complexity that only players favoring strategic play can manage to enjoy it. This is the likely reason for the eventual commercial failure of this franchise, since strategic players have become the minority among video game players. This problem with limitation should not be confused with the tactical playstyle's issue with constraint. Constraint is intended to refer to immediate barriers to action or movement, while limitation is intended to reflect the lack of meaningful options for affecting the game situation. A player favoring strategic play may tolerate being temporarily constrained, providing that they have sufficient choice of actions with which to figure out a way to remove the constraint, while a player favoring tactical play will generally be frustrated by the constraint itself. A brief history of strategic play. Because the rational temperament is associated with programmers and game designers, earlier video games were extremely influenced by strategic play. Early mainframe games in the 1970s, such as Star Trek, Mike Mayfield, 1971, Adventure, Colossal Cave, Will Crowther, 1975, and Dungeon, Don Daglow and its spiritual descendant Rogue, Toy Wickman and Arnold in 1980. Many early games were influenced by the tabletop war games and role-playing games of the 1970s, which were also great examples of strategic play, providing complex play resulting from many different rules and options. In the 1980s, new computers allowed strategic play to flourish further. Elite, Brabble and Bell in 1984 appealed to a number of different play styles, but the apparent lack of limitations, go anywhere, do anything, had a special strategic appeal. But the real focus of strategic play in video games from the 1980s were adventure games, typified by Zork, Infocom circa 1980 and its sequels, and at the latter end of the decade, graphical adventures such as The Pawn and Guild of Thieves by Magnetic Scrolls 1986 and 87. These games seem to provide few limitations, since the player could enter any command in plain text, although of course in practice this was a somewhat illusionary state of affairs. Near the end of the decade, simulations drawing from strategic play such as SimCity, Maxis 1989, started to emerge. In the 1990s, turn-based strategy games raised strategic play to a whole new level, with games such as Civilization, Masters of Orion, and the XCOM series. Additionally, strategic role-playing games such as Heroes of Might and Magic and the point-and-click adventure games such as The Secret of Monkey Island made this decade the golden age of strategic play for many people preferring this play style. Sadly, for players preferring strategic play, the arrival of the PlayStation in the mid-1990s marked a change in the focus of the video game market. Until this point, players favoring strategic play were arguably in the majority, and the bulk of the games being made appealed to those players in some way or another. But a new era was arriving, in which effortless 3D graphics opened the door to a wider market. The strategic player was about to go from being the key audience of video games to being a strong but diminished niche market. This change was to mark the end of the commercial importance of adventure games, and a gradual narrowing of the importance of turn-based strategy games, which today support very few viable franchises and maximum audiences of no more than 2 million units, while other types of games were able to pull a maximum audience of up to 8 million units during this time. Today, strategic play in isolation is a commercial backwater, although many successful games support strategic play along with other play styles. Conclusion. Strategic play was the force behind adventure games, strategy games, and simulations, as well as an influencing factor in the development of computer RPGs. Once the most important play style in the video games industry, it has since been eclipsed by the more popular tactical and logistical play styles, and now represents something of a niche market. With talents for dealing with complexity and problem-solving, and an especial weakness for min-maxing, the strategic player is somewhat of an expert in figuring out games, avoids play that in their eyes is limited, and armed with their strong drive for perfectionism, they generally master the games they adopt as their own. In many ways, they are the very model of the gamer hobbyist. This concludes audio article number 102, once again written by Chris Bateman, whose blog and consultant website can be found at ihobo.com. As we mentioned earlier, this article is in the Beyond Game Design 9-Step Towards Creating Better Video Games, published by Course Technology PTR. It's now available for purchase at Amazon.com, so head over there and pick up your copy today. As always, we recommend that you check back frequently with IndustryBroadcast.com, as we do our very best to update the site on a regular basis, bringing the collective insight of the gaming industry to your ears.